On this channel, we have covered numerous cases of alien encounters, alien abductions, and hauntings. It's easy to understand how many of these stories left witnesses terrified and traumatized for years. However, it's often overlooked how individuals who spot UFOs can experience those same feelings of dread. In today's episode, we will cover a popular UFO sighting from Exeter, New Hampshire. The case had multiple witnesses, and one man, 30 years after the event, still has nightmares about that night. In addition to this, that night, the object appeared to chase several individuals. The incident would garner national media attention, including congressional intervention, due to the incredibly embarrassing actions and behavior of the U.S. Air Force, who provided laughably bad explanations and tried to intimidate witnesses. In time, this well-documented, incredible event has come to be known as the 1965 Exeter, New Hampshire UFO Incident. On September 2nd, 1965, around 11 p.m., 18-year-old Norman Muscarello, a Navy recruit, left his girlfriend's home in Amesbury and began walking down a country road toward his home. Norman had an enjoyable evening with his girlfriend, and with the walk being about 12 miles, knew it would be some time before he returned home. At the time, Exeter was an extremely close community, with people leaving homes and cars unlocked at night, and everyone knowing one another. Still though, that night, Norman didn't want to hitchhike back and opted to enjoy the night and the walk. Then, around 1:30 a.m., as he was cresting the last hill into Exeter, Norman would spot a light ahead. Initially, he didn't think much of it, as there was a light coming from the country store. He kept walking and decided to cut through the dining family farm, when all of a sudden a huge ball of red and blue light shot up and over the home on the property. A stunned Norman looked on in disbelief. The light was as big as the home and lit up the night sky. He heard a few dogs bark, but then there was silence. Norman recalled later just how eerie and frightening this was. As a result, he ran and hopped into a ditch, hiding and peeking out at the object. He couldn't make out the color or shape because the light was so bright. Norman would continue to watch the object, and then the craft took off to the east quickly. He stated the light just kept getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared. Once he got up, a frantic Norman ran to the house and started banging on the door. A light came on, but the owners were too scared to answer. Still shook up, Norman ran back to the road and waited for a car to come over the hill. Once he spotted the headlights, Norman, who was standing in the middle of the road, began waving his arms. Luckily, the driver slowed, and the man knew Norman. He dropped him off at the police station. Once there, Norman ran inside. There was just one officer on duty, Reginald Tolan, who everyone called Scratch. Norman started telling Scratch the stories. Scratch wasn't saying much and appeared either annoyed or possibly overwhelmed. However, Norman would later find out similar reports were coming in from all over town. In fact, around that time, an officer named Eugene Bertrand would arrive. Officer Bertrand had just encountered a woman who was sitting in her car extremely terrified and shaking. She would state that a ball of red light chased her car and then disappeared. Norman would tell Eugene about his sighting, and soon the three decided they should head out to the farm where Norman had his. It was now between 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the morning, and as the three arrived, another officer out on patrol pulled up. Officer David Hunt had heard what was going on, but surely wasn't taking things seriously. He got on his megaphone and began making fun of his colleagues, stating things like, "How many beers you had tonight?" In a few moments though, Officer Hunt would eat his words. Once again over the tree line, the massive bright craft appeared. Officer Bertrand initially pulled his service weapon, but as it got closer, he realized how foolish it would be to discharge his weapon. For around the next 5 minutes, the officers and Norman watched the craft in disbelief. It hovered silently and was so bright It lit up the entire field. The dogs and horses were worked up, as were other animals. It then hovered up and put on some sort of show, zipping back and forth quickly. The incredible feat is something we see in many other UFO sightings. After around 5 minutes, the craft suddenly shot off in an instant. After the sighting, the officers returned to the Exeter police station. Very soon after getting there, a New Hampshire telephone operator called and told Scratch about a call she just got. A man alleged to be chased by an object with flashing red lights. She went on to say the man was asking for the police, but when she was trying to connect him, he disconnected. That wasn't the last sighting that evening. Around 20 miles away, a teacher would report a sighting too. The man was driving from Essex to Ipswich on Route 133. As he started ascending a hill, suddenly he felt static electricity in the hair on his head, and his arms just went up. A confused and tired man kept driving, but once he crested the hill, he spotted to his left a hovering, bright object. The man was so startled, he ran off the road. In total, there would be at least 6 different people who reported seeing a UFO that evening. All the witnesses were considered to be credible. News travels fast in a small town, and as morning came, the media and others began flocking to the homes of the eyewitnesses. While it was a nuisance, nothing could prepare Norman for the visit he would soon get. According to Norman, an Air Force lieutenant showed up. Norman's mom let him in, and he walked right up to Norman and said, "You, shut your mouth. Don't you say another word. I'm going to make your life miserable." Norman would go on to recall the man went on to tell him he didn't know what he saw, and he needed to stop talking. The disrespect would continue toward Norman's mom. The Air Force official brought a suitcase that was locked to his wrist. After arriving, he unlocked the briefcase and put it on the kitchen counter. The lieutenant then walked in the living room, and as he did, Norman's mom peeked inside. She saw photos of UFOs and imprints of what looked like places they had landed. At one point, the official saw Norman's mom looking and began chewing her out and even reading the Riot Act. To say the military response was suspicious was an understatement. The lieutenant was from nearby Peace Air Force Base. He went to the police and asked them to drop the investigation into the matter. The lieutenant also bought up all the newspapers the next few days in order to try and kill the story. In addition, he went around and talked with local farmers, asking if their cows were still producing the same amount of milk and whether there were any changes among their livestock. The lieutenant also went to the field where Norman and the cops spotted the UFO. He would ask the farmer to burn the field where it happened. His attempts to kill the story didn't work though, and soon Pease Air Force Base was forced to give a press conference. The commander at Pease Air Force Base called a press conference out at the field at the night where Norman and the police saw the craft. The commander stated that the eyewitnesses had spotted the lights at Pease Air Force Base, a remarkable and insulting explanation of the event. The press conference was a disaster as no one bought it, and they were forced to pivot. They would next allege the UFO was probably a military aircraft from Project Blue Blast. More specifically, they stated it was a B-47 type aircraft. The Pentagon would hear about the matter and suggested it could have been a star or planet. Still, none of these explanations made any sense to the witnesses. Officer Eugene Bertrand was in the Air Force and was familiar with all types of military aircraft. In addition, just a few minutes after the sighting, they saw a B-47 aircraft flying over the field. He, along with Officer David Hunt, wrote a letter to Major Quintanilla expressing their concerns over the explanation. From here, though, the Air Force didn't seem concerned, nor did they respond to the letter. However, the public was outraged after the event, and it led to future President and then Congressman Gerald Ford to step in. The Air Force had humiliated itself, and Congress was getting flooded with calls from their constituents. Something had to be done. On April 15th, 1966, under public pressure, hearings began before the House Armed Services Committee. As a result, in these hearings, the Air Force was forced to admit on record that the object was unidentified and had been unidentified from the very beginning. It's important to note here, unidentified to the military means that they don't know what it was or where it came from, and they have no control over the situation. This seemed like a significant win at the time, but of course it wasn't. Future sightings of UFOs would continue to be given the same poor explanations from the military and government. These include stars, planets, weather balloons, distant lights, or sometimes just discrediting the witnesses. That said, it is important to note that some do misidentify lights or objects in the sky to be spaceships from outer space, when in fact they do have logical explanations. That said, what can we make of this extremely credible case? In general, there are two main theories. The first is that this was a UFO from outer space. This is evidenced by the speed the object traveled, and also the reports of it aligning to other witness testimony. As we will discuss shortly, it was incredibly similar to another incident we covered recently, the 1966 Beverly, Massachusetts UFO case. The second theory was that this was an experimental military aircraft. This seems like a logical explanation as well, and it's very possible that's what it was. This could have been top secret, and even officials at Pease Air Force Base had no idea of the craft. Still though, this doesn't explain the behavior of the lieutenant, as he seemed to be familiar with the UFOs. Also, would it make sense for a military craft to fly into civilian areas? One interesting thing to point out is that the craft reappeared after Officer David Hunt started questioning their existence. In a prior video, the 1966 Beverly UFO Incident, almost the same exact thing happened. An officer began to make fun of the witnesses, and suddenly the craft shot down. As one viewer pointed out, it's as if the UFO was listening in. Even more strange, the Beverly incident happened just 1 year after this event in nearby Massachusetts, and also the craft lit up red too. Was this the same UFO or species of beings? It surely seems possible. 30 years after the event, Norman still had nightmares and was terrified of what he saw that night. Even with all the attention, he and the police officers were not able to get any sort of satisfactory explanation. This leads many to believe that our military and government is just as confused as we are in terms of what these beings are and what they want. Comment below and let us know what you think about this case.